And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Steel Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of SteelCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor for Steel Curtain, Shayne Kubas. We also have a special guest with us today, Josh Yourish, a college sports staff writer at Fansided. So thanks for coming on today, Josh.
Yep, thanks for having me.
This is going to be a fun show. We are going to do our mock draft simulator 1.0. We're going to run through a seven-round mock draft of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll decide how we're going to do that when we get to that point. That's going to be the second half of the show. We're going to talk about some news here this morning, and we're going to update the visit tracker that we shared with you guys last week. I think that's some pretty interesting stuff, and in an effort to kind of lock down who that pick could be for the Pittsburgh Steelers in round one and in the following rounds beyond that. Let's start with some news today, guys. Here we go. Antonio Brown predicted that Justin Simmons is going to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, he's been right on a few things. CT, ESPN, whatever. I don't know how much to read into this. Like, I don't know how credible this guy is, but he thinks that Simmons is going to sign. Obviously, the Steelers, they have Minkah on a huge deal. They signed Deshaun Elliott to play the safety spot opposite him. Do you think there's any truth to this, Shayne? I'll kick it over to you first.
So that's the trouble with this is like he's been right about a couple things, but I personally have not been willing to go through the account to see how often he's right or wrong. So I really don't know what his hit rate is right now. But assuming he would be right about this, obviously Simmons is a great player. I don't know if we need him at this point, and I think it would depend on the length of the contract, the amount of money. Obviously, we do still have some money to spend if they wanted to kind of go, even if it's for a year or two, like really go hard at safety and try to have a great back end of the defense. But it also doesn't really feel like that's what they're kind of going for. I think that's why they brought in Elliott. They wanted a cheap, way to kind of satisfy that position without it becoming more expensive than it already is for them. And I think he was a really good player last year, and you hope that he can repeat his success he had with the Dolphins. So I'd be surprised if this happens, but I wouldn't necessarily be upset with it. But we'll see if Brown's right about this one too.
It's just a credit to Antonio Brown at all that we have to give him any credence when he predicts anything because he's got some right. So it's pretty amazing that he's just throwing darts, it seems, but then a couple of them have been bullseyes. So eventually you have to go, well, does he know something?
He might have an insider somewhere. I mean, he was in the league for a long time. Despite all his issues, he still has probably fans in the league. Like, I don't know. It's interesting to see, if he continues to do this, is it going to be something that he actually does well at or not? We'll see.
Yeah, if this wasn't my job, Shayne, that account would be blocked. Like,
yeah, me too. Yeah,
I can't stand that stuff just popping up on my feed all the time because he says such nonsense on there. But anyway, I think that I take this with a grain of salt because the Steelers have already paid a pretty decent sized contract. I think that Deshaun Elliott's on a good deal, but it's still starter money. Like, I think that at the very most, like, maybe Simmons just has trouble at this point landing on that roster for what he's looking for and is maybe willing to take a 1-year deal. Like, I think that's the only way they make it work. And then you have to try to find a rotation. Obviously, Minkah's not the guy leaving the field. And so would Simmons be okay if he had maybe a part-time role in obvious passing downs and you play Elliott, or maybe play Elliott more of like towards a dime backer? I don't want to read too much into this, but I did want to acknowledge that because Brown has hit on a few in the past, he's something he threw out there this week and it was drawing some buzz. We'll see if it happens. If it does, Shayne, then I think we might have to start looking at what Brown says a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, unfortunately, maybe, yeah.
Mel Kiper just released his mock draft, his latest version of his mock draft. It was 2 rounds. He had the Steelers taking Graham Barton, the offensive lineman out of Duke, projects as a center for the Steelers, played obviously 3 years of left tackle in college. Before that was a center as a freshman. What's interesting about this mock, guys, is that in Kiper's latest version, he has Jackson Powers Johnson falling to the 47th overall pick, and he has Zach Frazier falling to pick 57. And so in my mind, it's like, all right, if the centers are really going to fall this far, is it worth taking Jackson? Is it worth taking Graham Barton in the first round? You can get a comparable guy. Would you trade up in the second? And Andrew, our contributor, Andrew False, did the study on where centers typically get drafted. It feels like there's a good chance that Frazier could be there based on history for the Steelers in the second round.
Yeah, and I think the issue with it is, if, like you said, if he's going to have the other centers or guys that project as centers fall that far, why does he have Barton that much higher? Because I do think Barton's a very good player, and I think he has versatility to play really all 3 interior positions, probably. Maybe could play tackle for you in a pinch, and maybe that gives him an edge over some of the other guys. But in general, there should not be that big of a gap between him and like Powers Johnson and Frazier more so. I get having a pretty big gap between those guys, but Powers Johnson and him are similar calibers of prospects for me. I think they both are worthy of like late first round picks, but I do think it's weird that he had Barton that much higher than those other two for sure.
It doesn't really make sense to me, the hubris that the Steelers have of just moving guys all around the offensive line.
That's
Obviously,
another problem we have.
Barton has played center before, but we ran into this problem with Kevin Dotson, left guard, right guard, and Broderick Jones moving over to the right now, and maybe he'll go back to the left tackle. But I think every offensive lineman will tell you that these are different positions. So when you have a center that's played center and gave up one pressure and almost 500 passing snaps last year for Oregon, why would you pass on him to take somebody that just introduces more risk because you are switching positions?
Yeah, it is an interesting decision. I like Barton as a prospect overall. I love his versatility, his athleticism, but you do wonder like if he needs a little bit more sand in the pants if you move to a position like center where you have to have a low center of gravity and be able to hold up in pass protection, which has been the Achilles heel of this offensive line for the Steelers since the retirement of Pouncey, like this line caving in with Kendrick Green and Mason Cole. You can't afford to take that gamble and not have it work out this time for a guy that might be a good run blocker, might be really good in that zone scheme, because I think that he would be a great fit as a zone blocker. But can you anchor in pass protection? That is something that we've just been very limited snaps on of this guy. And if you go all the way back to his freshman season, it's hardly relevant at this point when that was like 4 years ago now. And so that's the biggest concern I have with Barton. We have seen him in all the times I've watched film on him, I put on the All-22. I've seen instances where he can get long-armed and kind of just struggle to anchor in that pass protection. And so is that going to happen in the middle if you plug him in there? And I guess if you look at it this way, with the options available in Kiper's mock here, I would much rather go the second round route. Like I think that in an ideal scenario, you save that first round pick, you go like an offensive tackle, a premium money 5 position. And then in round 2, when Jackson Powers Johnson starts to fall, maybe for medical reasons, then you trade up a few spots into the second and you get a guy that's comparably good to Graham Barton, who has less question marks about playing that position. Is just a big square frame that you don't have to worry about getting pulled back into the pocket. So that's probably what I would do especially if we knew the draft was going to line up like that's, like sign me up for trading up a few spots for Jackson Powers Johnson. So it is interesting to note. And like I said, I've mentioned this on the pod before, guys, but Jackson Powers Johnson does have some medical questions. There are teams that have failed him medically. And I've heard of a few that have taken him off the board completely because of some of the things that he has. And I don't know how much of that information has been released. I don't want to share more than what has been released with me at this point. But I do think that he's a candidate to fall on day 2 because of some concerning medical stuff that will surface, I think, by the time the NFL draft hits. Let's talk about Amarius Mims here for a second, because this is a guy firmly on the Steelers draft radar. Like if you were to put a gun to my head right now, who is the pick at number 20? I think it's Mims. And I know that there are other teams interested. I think the Bengals could absolutely take him at pick 18. So it's going to be one of those instances. Are the Steelers content sitting there? Do they want to jump up 3 spots and leapfrog that team? But I do think that Mims is the guy that checks all these boxes, had the pro day dinner visit, had the pre-draft combine visit. And the Steelers met with him formally at the NFL Combine. He had his workout today, his Georgia workout. So for those who didn't know, kind of came up lame during the Combine stuff, only got to do his 40 and his jumps. He stood on those numbers. He did not try to retest there. He did limited on-field work from what I've heard, and he did not do the agility and shuttle once again. Not a big concern. I didn't expect him to be good at those things anyway because of how huge he is as a player. So it's not like he was going to wow anybody with those times. But this is something to note because I think that Mims is firmly on the radar for the Steelers in round 1.
Yeah, and I think the problem with him at this point is, again, the injuries are not like severe, but they did hamper him this past year, and now it's hampered him throughout the draft process, right? The biggest knock on this guy ultimately, and at least, I've watched a lot of his film. I love most of the tape that he's put out. There just isn't a whole lot of it, right? Like just ultimately, and, I don't blame him a ton for not getting on the field early because it's Georgia. They had a bunch of guys who are in the NFL right now that were ahead of him. Like that can be excused away. But the fact that his opportunity to play also got cut short, just kind of dampers that a little bit. But I do think the talent level is a little too high for teams to not take him very early, and including the Steelers possibly at 20. So it just comes down to how comfortable are you with his profile, having not played a ton and possible injury concerns. They just don't make guys like this, though, at the end of the day. Like, if you're banking on talent, if you're banking on somebody to succeed, this is the type of profile you look for. Above average athleticism for the position in general, but a factor in his size even greater than that. The ability to pass protect, very young player in that way, and still able to do that. You project him to be able to be an elite right tackle one day, and if you pair him with his former teammate, might have bookends for the next 10 years, right? Like, it's kind of hard to pass that up if you're the Steelers, assuming you are comfortable with his medicals.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of medical question marks, what we were talking about with Jackson Powers Johnson, Amarius Mims, it's kind of the same exact situation. If he was healthy, I mean, you guys can speak on it, but it seems like he's a top 10 pick. If there were, he's, obviously healthy right now, did his pro day, but if there were no concerns, if there was more tape and it all looked the same, this is a guy that feels like he's a top 10 pick because he was fantastic at Georgia when he was on the field. That offensive line was completely different when he was on the right end of it. And then you wonder, like, the Steelers could incur a lot of risk if you make the Mims pick at 20 and maybe, like Tommy said, you trade up in the second round and you get JPJ, but also that's a good looking offensive line when it's out there.
It would be. Yeah.
So there's options there, but Mims is a player that I love and would love to see the Steelers take, as somebody who's watched college football quite a bit and is, watching the Steelers every Sunday and loves the Steelers, that there's so much upside there. And it feels like you got to take a swing.
Yeah. Can you imagine that 1-2 punch, Josh, if you were to go Mims and then JPJ back to back? The upgrade in strength and core power on that offensive line from Mason Cole and Dan Moore Jr.
It'd be unbelievable.
Yeah,
it would be. And I think it would be noticeable from day one. So I think that's almost like the dream scenario outlined there. Greg Cosell of the 33rd team released a mock draft, a scouting report just today of Amarius Mims. And he spoke wonders of Mims. He's really, really high on him. He says if things work out, he has a chance to be one of the better offensive tackles in the entire NFL. And so it's easy to see those traits there with what he has in his game. You just don't get guys that have his anchoring ability with his type of length and that body type. It is pretty exceptionally rare. And so that's a name to track. Obviously very, very high on the Steelers' radar. We're going to get to these new visits now. If you guys are joining us here in the live chat, please drop a question in for us. We'd love to be able to get to those for you. Shayne, let's talk about the new pre-draft visits that just came in for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I want to kind of rehash the ones that have been there, and these new ones add another element here, because what's been interesting from the very beginning, we knew the Steelers were going to have a huge need at center. That need became even larger when they decided to cut ties with Mason Cole before free agency started. What was interesting, though, is that apart from a formal combine visit with Graham Barton and a reported top 30 visit, albeit local visit with Zach Frazier, there was just not a lot of interest in the top 3 tackles in this class. Now, we just learned today that Jackson Powers Johnson is getting that formal top 30 pre-draft visit with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is one we needed to see. And people have asked me before, and they're coming back at me now saying, oh, he's not on the radar, is he? I've said, no, he wasn't before this, because you just can't assume the Steelers are going to go out and draft somebody they've never met with during the pre-draft process. Now Jackson Powers Johnson is firmly on that list. Now, again, I want to reiterate, this would still be an outlier in terms of things that have happened in the past, because typically the Steelers, under the direction of Mike Tomlin and the GM, only draft a player that they've met with at their pro day. So he would still be going against that trend, that trend that we've saw true since 2007, I think, with one exception, the David DeCastro year. Yeah, it would still be going against that trend. However, we have to say that JPJ is at least on the map now to be that 20th overall pick because of this pre-draft visit. And Shayne, maybe the Steelers have an indication of where these medicals are, and it's going to drop him a little bit. And if that's the case, maybe they're looking at this as a guy as a potential second-round trade-up option.
That's what I think is more likely. And we'll put up the tracker here in a second to kind of show you guys where we're at with that. But if he does fall into the second round, and especially if he falls into the 40s or so, that puts them firmly, if they are okay with the medicals and they see the need, obviously, at center, which I'm sure they do. I hope so with them. Who knows? But, ultimately that's somebody that they could come up and get then at that point. They picked up a couple extra late round picks over the offseason with trades and such. Like, they could come up with not that many spots and probably not to give up too much to do so, and get a guy who you hope that if he is healthy and everything works out, he profiles as a top 5 center, possibly long down the stretch as he gets older and gets more experience in the NFL. So I would love to see them do that if it becomes an option. Obviously, like we talked about, it all comes down to medicals with him, probably based on what you've been hearing, at least, Tommy. So don't want to take too huge of a risk with a second round pick. So if it's a real major concern, then maybe you don't do that. But I would love to see that person, just from my own personal grade on him.
Talking about those two guys, Mims and JPJ, in conjunction, do you think if Mims is off the board in the first round, they go a different direction at tackle? I'll pose it to either of you. Then if they don't take Mims in the first round, they're more willing to incur that injury risk, whatever it may be, in the second round with JPJ, or vice versa. If they do take Mims, does that kind of take JPJ off the board because you just don't want to take these 2 dart throws and potentially you lose your first 2 picks if they both get hurt? Do you feel like that's a factor?
Josh, I think that question is at least warranted because the Steelers have to know of these medicals. If they're willing to draft back-to-back picks, guys that have had an injury history, Jackson Powers Johnson hasn't missed a lot of game time with it, but what his medicals are, I think that would be interesting to see where they would go that way. Typically, they like drafting players that are healthy. It's just what they do. I think they're willing to make an exception in some cases where the talent lines up with the need and the value. I don't have an issue with it, but I think they might have more of an issue with it than I would.
I think that ultimately, if they take Mims in the first round, if they actually think there's medicals, which again, it's not like he's been injured his entire career or anything like that. He's been banged up a little bit last year and then in the pre-draft process. There might not be any red flags on his medicals, in general. It might just be that he happened to get banged up a little bit. If there's no red flags from his medicals, then I don't know if it matters to them if they take him first and then JPJ second. However, if we find out that Mims does have some stuff that hasn't been either reported or they think that this is like a nagging issue that has going on, then I could see them maybe playing it safer with whichever pick they don't go with one of those guys. So.
Either way, I'd love to see them end up with those two. Nice. That seems like a dream scenario to end up with those guys on the offensive line.
Yeah,
that would be pretty ideal. We're going to pause for a question here, and I think this is a terrific question from Ivan. If J.C. Latham and Mims are available at pick 20, which is going to be the pick for the Steelers? I think that the pick is going to be Mims based on the visits. Latham has not gotten a pre-draft visit, not to say that it can't come. The Steelers still have some in the bag that they can use. If Latham gets that as well, then it becomes more of a conversation. But because Mims was reported to have the pro day dinner meeting, the pre-draft visit, and the formal combine visit, he checks all those boxes that we look for a Steelers first round pick. I think another way to spin this, Shayne, would be which is the better player overall, because I think that that's a warranted question as well. And I think that kind of depends on which team is drafting these guys. Like if it's a team that has a need at tackle and guard, maybe Latham is higher on the board, because I think that Latham could absolutely be a dominating guard if kicked inside at the next level. And there are some teams that actually view him as a guard. Mims is more of your tackle only type player. Like, I don't think that you're going to want to kick a nearly 6'8" guy inside to play that spot. Like, he needs to make it work at tackle. So if you value the scheme versatility and you like the run blocking ability of Latham, I can totally get behind why teams would have him higher on the board than Mims, but I am going to be interested to see where these guys end up.
Yeah, for me, and I know some people, and I forget who it is I think it's NFL Network, has Latham as his top tackle, period, even over Alt and Fashanu and guys like that. Wow. I can't get there with Latham. I think he's a guard. I really think that if he wants to be like anything more than a replacement level player, starter type, then he needs to play guard. As a tackle, I don't love his foot speed. Like, I just don't think he's going to be able to protect his outside shoulder against a lot of pass rushers at the next level. And he doesn't have the aggressiveness that you'd hope for out of a player with his profile all the time, which does make his profile into guard a little bit of a projection, just because I don't know if the tenacity is there in the run game as much as it should be personally. However, if he's going to be a great player in the NFL, I do think it's going to have to come inside. So for the Steelers, at least, I would want them to take Mims. But it just comes down to, like you said, if they bring him in for a pre-draft visit, then it's certainly up in the air who they might take if both are on the board.
for me, it feels like Mims is the better player.
Yeah,
and that's just watching Alabama games. And, obviously you go back in the film later, but in the moment, that Alabama offensive line, it's not all on one guy, but was not a good pass protecting offensive line.
Really,
and
no.
if you have a 5-star tackle on the other side and Latham, and who's supposed to be a first round prospect, obviously Jalen Milroe had something to do with that, holding onto the ball, a little bit of the Justin Fields, Russell Wilson situation. So he'd be familiar with that type of quarterback, but Mims is just rock steady when he's out there. So if you're asking who it should be, in my opinion, I'd go Mims over Latham like you would.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and Latham, I've watched all the losses of these guys. My draft buddy has all the premium film, and so we can watch losses back to back to back to back. And I think that what's concerning about Latham's film is he has a tendency to lose on that inside move too often, where that scares me a little bit.
He's trying to protect his outside shoulder too much because he knows he has to.
Oversetting a little bit. And so in pass protection, like I think that Mims is kind of heads and shoulders above Latham in that regard. I do think that Latham is a little bit better on his feet, and he's definitely a better run blocker than Mims at this point. I don't know how much Mims can develop there. And Mims might always be a little bit limited as a run blocker just because of the lateral quickness. You get a guy that's that big and long, you're going to be limited a little bit laterally. I'm going to have Mims probably a little bit higher on my board than Latham. I personally value the pure tackle over the guy with maybe the position flex. It could be a right tackle, right guard type.
Right.
Let's talk about, let's go to the next name on the list here, Shayne, Nate Wiggins. So what we're doing here is we're gonna brush across these names that were not added that were added since the last time we did our show this past week. So we're going to run through these right here.
The tracker
and there's our tracker up there. If you guys are following us on YouTube now, Wiggins now joins Amarius Mims as the only player to receive all of these visits from the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of the pro day dinner meeting, checks that box, the top 30 visit, in the formal combine visit. Does that make him the second most likely player to be drafted by the Steelers? I don't know, but it is interesting to note. If you also look at some of the other top names on this list, or if you were listening to the podcast version, Terrion Arnold is up there. Kool-Aid McKinstry is up there. So cornerback is something that is firmly on their radar. And it does make me wonder, Shayne and Josh, if the Steelers miss out on Amarius Mims, would they target a cornerback potentially over a JC Latham or a Talisa Fuaga if he ends up falling to that pick? Do they like these guys more? Based on the visit tracker, you could make an argument there. And the Steelers obviously need help at cornerback as well.
I'll say, and this is something I've said to a lot of people, because I've doing this show and just talking football a lot with guys. There's people that will ask me, like, what do you think the Steelers' plans are with 20, especially, right? And I've kind of always said since the draft season started, it's going to depend on which position between tackle and cornerback have a run in front of them if they don't move up. So if a tackle run happens in front of them, let's say Mims goes at 18 to the Bengals, or whoever takes him ahead of him, and maybe they don't love Latham, right? Maybe Latham is at that point the fifth tackle, or whoever it might be. But the corners, maybe they haven't gone. Like maybe some of the corners, like a Nate Wiggins or an Arnold or whoever, just haven't gone yet. Whether it's because teams didn't prioritize them, maybe edge has a run too in front of the Steelers, like whatever may happen. If your third corner's on the board and your fifth tackle's on the board, you're probably going to lean corner at that point, realistically, right? Now, you could argue about which is actually more important to the Steelers and this and that, but I do think corner would be the second position they're going to target if they don't target a tackle. And then interior offensive line you can throw in there, like we talked about with the centers, if they really like them or not, whatever. But I think it is between tackle and corner for 20 right now, if you had to make me guess at this point.
It seems like it kind of comes down a little bit to their level of faith in Dan Moore Jr., which is just higher than it should be.
Everyone else's,
than anyone else's faith in Dan Moore Jr. or anyone that watches football believes that he can be a left tackle, but they seem to believe he can be a left tackle, and he tells them, I won't play right tackle, and so they run him out there at left tackle. So they seem comfortable there, and there's not a lot behind Joey Porter Jr. at corner.
Mm-hmm.
I like the group of corners. You have the Alabama guys up there as well with Wiggins. It comes down to kind of preference. You're getting into different types of players, but they need an outside corner. Wiggins fits that mold. He's longer. He's a little handsy, kind of at the top of routes. that sounds a little bit like Joey Porter Jr., and that worked out pretty well. He obviously, can't tie his shoes standing straight up like Joey Porter Jr. can. It's not that level of length.
Yeah, he's actually a little shorter length than expected, but
but I feel like he's a good player, and has some of those flaws that they've been able to succeed with recently. So it seems like there could be a fit there.
Yeah, Wiggins is a guy that deceived me a little bit, because when I watched him at Clemson, I'm like, all right, this is a corner in the mold of Porter. We know he's not that big, but he looks wiry. He's got sticky man coverage ability. He can stay in the hip pocket of wide receivers. And then he comes into the combine at 173 pounds, pulls up lame on the 40, and has 30 7/8 arms, which I think is like 29th percentile length.
Yeah.
I was a little bit deceived by his frame just because of how big he plays at times on the football field. Now, I don't know how much it matters ultimately, because when you have that 4.28 speed, and you're really sticky that way,
and
I
it
think
shows
that
on
he can
tape
still be
too.
really good. Now, the fit, I think, is perfect. Like, I think that he plays like Joey Porter plays, and I think that that's what the Steelers want to do. They want to be able to do bump and run, man coverage, and not have a glaring weakness like a Levi Wallace on the other side of them over there. So I think that he absolutely fits that style. I think it's a bit of a reach for me personally when I'm going through and I'm really putting my board together. I just think that there are a few red flags here, including missing like 40% of the season last year. He came out early as a young guy, so I think all the upside is there. I was a little bit deceived by him. I was hoping he'd come in closer to the 32-inch arm mark and the 185-pound mark. And when you fall well short of these things and you're like the 12th lightest corner to come out into the draft, it's a little bit concerning to me, because there just aren't a lot of success stories. We saw Emmanuel Forbes, how badly he struggled as a rookie because he just didn't have enough sand in his pants to push guys around. And I wonder if that's going to be the case with Wiggins or not. I do have him as more of like a tail end of the first, early second round type of guy, which doesn't really line up where Steelers are picking. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that?
I will say real quick, and I did find this out like a week ago or so. It turns out that he was sick during the combine, and that's why his weight was so bad. When he weighed in at, I think the pro day was close to 185, which is what I thought he played at. So I'm hoping he can be 185 plus at the next level and keep that speed. So I'm a little less concerned about the weight and more so about, like you said, the length wasn't quite there. There is some issues on tape sometimes with me. He's probably not going to be a great run defender simply because of his size. He will run plays down. There's plenty of examples of him having the effort plays, which I know Mike Tomlin probably loved watching on film. So I think he's firmly in play, but I will agree that he's probably going to come in closer to like the 30s on my ultimate board than he is going to be in 20s. So
it makes you wonder if Wiggins is kind of a guy who's a very good college player and he doesn't hit those athletic or length thresholds that you kind of need to play that same way. Specifically the length. Like if he wants to play like a Joey Porter Jr., he can do that at the college level, and then you don't have those long arms, and all of a sudden, that little tug, you see it a little bit more. You just can't cover up against these long guys. So it's kind of the what happened with Kenny Pickett, right? He's got, B- traits. Right. But he wants to play like a player who has A NFL traits or A+ NFL traits, and that just doesn't work. So that is kind of the worry there with somebody that wants to play that grabby, bump and run corner, and you don't have the arm length.
Yeah, and we have some.
Yeah, and I do have that. I've got those numbers right here. I'm sorry, Shane. Let's see. From Dane Brugler in his draft guide, he came in at 182 at his pro day, so definitely a little bit better there. 73 3/8 wingspan measured at his pro day is very narrow. It's not. It's you're talking about like a foot difference between him and Joey Porter. So big gap there. All right, go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, we just have a chat again. Like, I don't like Wiggins at all. Look at the kid Washington drafted, Forbes, same size he got Sundell season. Yeah, so that's kind of the concern is, can he play at that weight and not get thrown around? Now, I didn't see that a ton on his tape or anything. Like Forbes, you could, like when he got hit or when he made contact with people, he got most of that contact. Like that was very evident on his film. I didn't see that nearly as much with Wiggins. So it's more so, can he play the way, like you said, Josh and Tom, like, can he play at that level, at the next level, playing that way? It's kind of similar to, and I think he's a better prospect than this guy, but if you remember Roger McCreary, Tennessee drafted a couple years ago, he was that bump and run press man corner at Auburn. and he had like sub 30-inch, I think, arms is what he came in at. And like he's been a good player for them so far, but he can't quite play the same way he did at Auburn simply just because he doesn't have the length to do so, right? And Wiggins obviously has the height, which doesn't really matter as much, but it's still, I guess, a little bit helpful for him. But it is going to be interesting to see, does he have to kind of change his game a little bit to make good value on a first-round pick if that's where you take him? So
yeah, and to throw out a Steelers example here, guys, maybe he's honestly a blend between the two corners they have right now, Joey Porter and Dante Jackson. I mean, you get the speed, you get the elite top-end speed that way, sub 4.3 speed, but you're also not getting a guy with a very big frame either. So you're going to have to be tighter in coverage that way. Right. Let's move on to another name. I don't want to spend too much time on Wiggins, but he is a guy that does check all of the boxes now. So he is in play with that 20th overall pick. The Steelers had a pre-draft visit with Texas wide receiver Adonai Mitchell. This one's very interesting because this team has expressed interest in some of the top receivers. If you go back to the NFL Combine, they met with Rome Odunze, as far-fetched as that was. I mean, unless you're
I don't know about
the top 7-ish. So that one's not realistic, but they did meet with Brian Thomas Jr. They met with A.D. Mitchell at the Combine, and now they're meeting with Mitchell again for a top 30 pre-draft visit. That puts him on the map for sure with that 20th overall selection. I think like another great scenario would be like maybe you trade back with the team a few spots, still able to land a guy like that. It does seem a little bit rich, and I know that Steelers fans, most of them will say this, taking a wide receiver in the first round, even after trading Deontay Johnson, there are some glaring holes on this roster, but I do think that one of them is the wide receiver 2 spot. Like you have nobody outside of George Pickens that can man that role. It's not going to be Van Jefferson or Calvin Austin. You need a significant upgrade in that role, and I think the Steelers are getting serious about that.
Yeah, I think that with Mitchell, he's one of my favorite players in the draft. He has a weird profile because he was pretty much a downfield threat entirely for Texas. Like his average depth of target, I forget what it was something stupid like something plus 12. I think it was 12 plus yards like for average depth of target. But when he's like engaged, and I think part of the problem is when he isn't getting the football, he knows it and he kind of plays like it, which does throw people off a little bit. But, we already kind of have that type of profile in Pickens a little bit. So maybe they don't care about that. But I think if you're just going off of talent, it's really hard to ignore what this guy looks like when the ball comes his way. Like after the catch, it's not quite the same, but he reminds me a lot of CeeDee Lamb before the catch. Like he doesn't have quite the same ability after he gets the ball that Lamb has shown, but his route running, the nuance to it, his ability to separate at that size, like he would give them a true downfield target on top of Pickens, which in this offense with Arthur Smith, you want two things, right? You want to be able to run the football effectively, and you want to be able to throw the ball off play action down the field. You'll be able to do that in spades with both of these guys, with Pickens and Mitchell on the field together if they'd go that route.
Like you, Shane, I really like A.D. Mitchell as a prospect. Like if you just watch the college football playoff against Washington, right at the end, it felt like it was over and Washington just had it. And he was basically yelling at Quinn Ewers on the field every time, just throw me the ball. And he did. And he scored a touchdown. He was right over top of the corner. That's the type of player you're getting here. It's a player with a wide receiver 1 attitude and maybe not wide receiver 1 ability, which scares me when George Pickens is your wide receiver 1. Like A.D. Mitchell was at Georgia before. He was kind of the George Pickens light, like the next George Pickens once Pickens left. And there's some similarities in terms of like demanding the ball. And then if they don't get it, how are they going to behave? Right. And we know what happened with the Falcons and Arthur Smith. Like the stars don't always get the ball. Like that's not always the priority. And so are you entering another, volcanic situation with these types of wide receivers?
Maybe.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that is worth noting. I'm glad you brought that up. Shane, to your point, you gave the exact example that one of my draft buddies just gave. We watched A.D. Mitchell's film. We put on his film just last night. He said the same thing. CeeDee Lamb before the catch, not nearly as talented after the catch as Lamb, but you can see why, because he's got that big frame, soft, natural hands. He can line up in the slot, line up outside. He's a pretty nuanced route runner, even though he still has work to do in that department. He can gain some separation from being a bigger guy. The one thing that worries me a little bit about his game, he can be a little bit soft at the catch point too. If people try to come through,
he's like
attack
200-ish pounds. Like he's not the biggest guy despite his frame. Like he's
I think he needs to attack the ball a little bit more when it's in the air. But I am intrigued by him for sure. I think that's pretty much an on value pick. for where the Steelers are going to be. I like Brian Thomas Jr. a little bit better. I think I like the upside that you're getting with that.
Those two constantly.
I get that for sure.
When I do my board, they're going to be within like 4 spots of each other. So,
and that's another one. Like if he ends up getting one of these final pre-draft visits of the Steelers, like, like, all right, if Mims isn't there, maybe that's the next best option for the Steelers there. But I do think that Mitchell is a name that we really need to start talking about in Steelers circles, because he's firmly on their radar now with that draft visit. Again, this would go against the pro day trend, but with the Steelers only going to 4 pro days this year,
it's really hard to know if that's going to be a deciding factor for them this year.
Exactly. Let's talk just a few minutes on each of these prospects here, and we'll kind of breeze through them. Cornerback Max Melton from Rutgers got a visit by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Very explosive guy, had like 11'4" broad jump at 40.5-inch vertical.
Crazy, yeah.
He is a guy that's projected to go early-ish day 2, so maybe like a second round, maybe early third round at the latest. That's probably somebody the Steelers would maybe have to spend their second round pick on. Just looking at the consensus board, looking ahead right now, they do need that type of player. Melton can play slot cornerback for them. What are you guys' thoughts on him?
He's a guy that I'm glad got some hype, because coming into the year, there were some people that were higher on him. I remember the stock exchange guys like Trevor Sikkema and Connor Rogers talked about him in their corner rankings. And Rutgers doesn't get a lot of love, right? Like, kind of for good reason most of the time, but brother Bo Melton kind of broke out for the Packers last year late as a receiver, both really explosive athletes. That's kind of what you're getting with him. Like you said, if you want an athlete at corner who you hope you can kind of develop into a starting level player, I think he'd be able to come in and do that pretty quickly.
That Rutgers defense was pretty good last year. Right. At the beginning of the season, they kind of had him in the slot a little bit more, and he was getting targeted more there, and then they moved him back outside. I don't know if maybe they weren't comfortable playing him in the slot as much. So you question the versatility some, but I mean, he held up pretty well against, Marvin Harrison Jr. when they played Ohio State. They hung around everyone held up better than Kalen King did. Kalen King did not have a good day when Penn State played Ohio State. That was not pretty. But Rutgers, they hung around in that game, and he was a big reason why. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. really only had like 3 catches. 2 of them were for touchdowns on the goal line, but that's going to happen when it's Marvin Harrison Jr.
Right.
Like, this is a potentially generational wide receiver prospect. I think he performed well in that game, and that Rutgers passing defense was pretty good, and he's a big reason why.
Yeah, I do think it also shows you that the Steelers they're really looking at that guy who can play slot corner for them, maybe a little bit of outside, do some of both. Andrew Phillips was another visit that we talked about last time. They visited with Daquan Hardy of Penn State. And so I think they want a guy, and they need a guy. Like, they don't have a guy at all on the roster right now that can play this slot. And so they're going to have to find, and this is a position that I've talked about several times now. I really think the Steelers could double up on cornerback. I know you only get 7 picks, but cornerback, wide receiver, those are the 2 positions. If you're not counting like O-line as a group, I guess they could go with a pair of offensive tackles, but that seems a bit unnecessary especially if you're taking one early, you get more down as a swing, whatever. Wide receiver, cornerback, those are the 2 positions in my mind to keep an eye on. The Steelers could potentially double up this year based on their visits as well. When you look at the cluster of wide receivers, where these guys are in terms of where their projections are to get drafted, and then cornerbacks as well. You could take one early. You could take one in the middle rounds as well. So keep an eye on that. The Steelers met with Blake Fisher, or reported today, meeting with the Notre Dame offensive tackle, the guy playing opposite of Joe Alt over there. Obviously not near the prospect as Alt, but a young guy, a guy that offers a little bit of intrigue there, but a developmental offensive tackle who could potentially be a starter for you for a little while here. I don't know if he really fits that profile at that tackle that the Steelers are looking for in terms of like the size and length and just the brute strength and core power. But it is a name to keep an eye on.
The thing I'll say with him, and when I saw that they met with him, it was interesting to me because obviously I watched a lot of Joe Alt when I was doing my tackles and stuff. And I noticed, I'm like, man, this guy on the other side's pretty good too. Like, they're not really giving up a whole lot of pressure at Notre Dame. But no, I think he's a good player. I do wonder how early he's going to go, because the fact that he came out this year when he probably had a chance to maybe transition over to left tackle and have a chance to be drafted higher if he were to come back to Notre Dame this year, makes me think that the NFL told him he's probably got a pretty solid grade, like a early day 2 or mid day 2 type of grade. So that would be putting him in range for hopefully in our case probably the 3rd round pick, but still like. he's the guy to watch out for if they're bringing him in. And I do think he had pretty good tape at Notre Dame. I do wonder, like you said, if the size profile is what they want. But at the end of the day, like I'll take anybody who I think might be better than Dan Moore, and he certainly fits that bill. So I'm not going to complain too much.
That's exactly where I was going to go with him. It was kind of a surprise that he left Notre Dame early. You feel like, okay, now it's your time to shine. You're out of Joe Alt's shadow. You take over on the left side, show that you can play both sides. And so there, like you said, there must be something a little more there that the NFL's seeing if he's coming out this early, especially, NIL now. You can make some pretty good money being a top offensive lineman at Notre Dame. Yeah, they're not playing for free up at Notre Dame in terms of those NIL deals. So he has, I don't know about a guarantee, but you got to think he's got some assurances that he's not going to be waiting around long.
Right.
Yeah, Josh, and I think that maybe Fisher is this fallback plan. Like you get wiped out at offensive tackle, and now you get to like the second, third round. You can start considering a guy like this who would allow the flexibility of Broderick Jones to kick back over to his more natural position, and you're not left empty-handed. And so I do think he offers some intrigue there for sure. Let's talk about these.
I was just going to say the nice thing about that, kind of mindset, if they miss out on those early tackles, a lot of the tackle needy teams will have a first round guy that they already took. So somebody like Fisher could slide a little bit because they can kind of wait and say everyone else filled their need. Right. Like we can just wait on this guy. It's like when you don't take a quarterback in a fantasy draft, everyone else already took theirs. So you don't have to take it in the second. Maybe you get it late third.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Find where the value lines up with the need there. And I like him in respect to where I think he's going to be drafted. Let's talk about just a few more names here. Logan Lee, the Iowa defensive lineman. It looks like Steelers are going for a type. I know that Lee doesn't have extreme length, but he fits that height requirement the Steelers seem to be looking at. All these guys that are like 6'5 plus, typically the long arm guys. I know that that's not him. But another guy that maybe if they miss out on the Chris Jenkins and the Mason Smith, those type of guys, he could be right in that range next in line there.
Yeah, I haven't watched much of him yet. Admittedly, I've kind of avoided Iowa like the plague for the most part, just because I don't appreciate their brand of football a lot of the time. That being bad mostly. But again, like he does fit their size profile, like you said, Tommy. I think that this is the type of player you draft on day 3 and hope that he could be a rotational player for you. Kind of similar to what they've done with some other guys in the last couple of years, Loudermilk guys like that. But again, Iowa, if you draft defensive players from there, probably okay with that because that's the only thing that they do well. That and tight ends, but
Yeah, I mean that Iowa defense, they have a pretty steady rotation on the defensive line. That's kind of what they're known for. And he was a big part of that. I think it was 28 pressures, 2 sacks from the interior. That's not bad in Big Ten football. Pretty good numbers from him. So there could be something there.
Yeah, and the last 2 names here that we didn't talk about last time, they came in just recently. Stephen Jones, offensive lineman. Some have an undrafted grade on him, some like a 6th or 7th round grade. I think that's a guy they look at with one of their final picks. But Luke McCaffrey is interesting because this guy was a quarterback his first 3 seasons, makes a switch to wide receiver over at Rutgers, and it's a good player. I mean, a guy that was an efficient player, caught the ball well in traffic, had 13 touchdowns this past season. So he does check some of those boxes to be that late round guy, and the Steelers like family bloodlines. I can't emphasize that enough. There's just an overwhelming amount of evidence at this point. He feels like he has a chance to be like the Connor Hayward pick of this draft.
Yeah, real quick, it's Rice, Tommy. I didn't want anybody to
Rice. I'm sorry. I
didn't
had
want
Rice in
anybody
my head, and I got
Had
we just talked about
mind.
Melton.
Yeah,
Max Melton. Right. I didn't want anybody to comment on that for you, but McCaffrey is an interesting guy because I do think he profiles as like not like a true big slot because he's not like really heavy or anything, but a bigger slot receiver. Tested really well too, which I kind of expected him to. Like bloodlines are there, that for sure. But yeah, I could see him being a day 3 pick for this team if they want to address receivers for the second time, hopefully in that situation. To kind of bring in a guy who can play in the slot to do that stuff for them. I do wonder, and this is my one concern with this offense, well, not my one, but one of the major ones, is the slot receiver position. Do they care even a little bit? Like, does it matter at all to them? Because I know for Arthur Smith, it really kind of doesn't historically. Like, it's not something that he prioritizes. So we'll see if they really address that with anything meaningful. Maybe they're just okay with throwing the grab bag of the Jefferson, Watkins, Austin, whatever it is. Maybe they're okay with that, but if he's their only receiver pick, then I might have a little bit of questions. But
McCaffrey's funny because you see the name and you think shifty and you know, that side to side movement, and that's not really his game. Like he's kind of a seam guy and a lot of kind of overs and in traffic. So it's weird to just see that name and you expect to turn it on and you see that shifty slot guy like what Christian McCaffrey would be if he was a receiver.
Right.
And that's not really the case with him, but he's a good athlete still.
Right.
And I think he could kind of play well in that play action type of, you know, roll over the middle.
Yeah.
But like you said,
and stuff.
Yeah. Like you said, Arthur Smith, like that's not really his deal with a slot guy on the field. So is there going to be a fit?
Yeah, Josh, good way to put that, because I saw the same thing when we were watching his tape last night. Actually, more of a contested catch guy than he is a separator. So,
and somebody needs to get him a new helmet. Somebody needs to get their helmet. Did you notice his helmet is just always getting knocked off on some big
he needs to fix that chin strap or something there.
Something's not right. Yeah, he must
absolutely. Well, we're gonna skip over our next discussion topic. We're gonna get to our 7-round mock draft now for time reasons. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you'd like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. I'm excited for this, Shayne. This is the first time that you and I are doing this. We're doing this with Josh today too. We're gonna go through a mock draft, and feel free, if you guys are joining us in the live chat, to chime in with who you think should be the selection. Now, how you guys want to do this? We can do it in terms of realism. We can do it in terms of our favorite mock. Do you have a preference?
I kind of wanted this first one to be more about what we would want to do if we were the Steelers, because we can do like the last show before the draft. We could always hop in and do a mock draft for that and do like our actual predictive mock. Like, what do we think based on, because we will have all the information we could ever hope for. We'll know exactly what, you know, the Steelers have done to this point in terms of their work on prospects. So I think this one should just be like our collective, like, talk about like, okay, what would we actually do given the circumstances we're given in this draft? So
I agree. Let's go for it. So we'll kick things off here, and you guys can comment in if you are watching live. If you are watching this on our recording, we'll make sure that we are talking about everything that's happening here so that you can follow along. So can we rehash these picks for us? Can you rehash these picks, Shayne?
Yes. So
all the guys, we're at 20, and here's the guys that have gone so far.
Yeah. So we got Caleb Williams, obviously went number 1. Drake May, Jane Daniels. We got quarterback, which is pretty common for these drafts. Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors for the Chargers, which I would say is should be probably what they do, but we'll see if they do that. McCarthy goes at 6, the Giants. So Vikings, too bad. We got Rome Odunze going to the Titans, Joe Alt actually to the Falcons. So that's interesting that those two went next to each other that way. Oh, went down too far. And then we had Dallas Turner go to the Bears, Brock Bowers to the Jets. Fashanu goes to the Vikings, 11, so no quarterback for them yet. Talise Fuanga, Graham Barton, Troy Fatanu, J.C. Latham goes pretty early. Brian Thomas Jr., the Seahawks, okay. That's interesting. Maybe they're going to trade somebody in this situation. Quinion Mitchell, Byron Murphy to the Bengals, and then Jared Verse to the Rams.
All right, that's where we are right now. And we're looking at some of the top names on the list. We got Johnny Newton. I like Johnny Newton. It's just rich. It's just rich. I feel like with all the Steelers needs to take.
That's a luxury pick for a team like the Steelers.
So, and again, we're going to do this as we're going to collectively, the three of us, pick what we would do in a Steelers mock. So not necessarily where the Steelers would go with this pick. Looking at these top names here: Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins, Amarius Mims, Cooper DeJean, Jackson Powers Johnson. What are you guys thinking for this first round pick here?
I think for me, it's between Arnold and Mims. Do you like Mims enough to not take a guy like Arnold, who is kind of one of those guys that's in contention for the first corner? I think Mitchell kind of has that lead right now with everything he's done in the pre-draft process, but Arnold is about as technically sound as you're going to get. He's a good athlete, maybe not as explosive as a guy like Mitchell, but really smooth. I really like his game. I think he'd be a great opposite to Joey. But Mims is sitting there, and I know we're doing what we would do, but I also like Mims a lot, so I don't really know if it matters that much.
I feel like the run on tackles already happened, so you're getting a higher rated corner than you would be a tackle. But Mims is still kind of the tackle that we would want, so you can just still take him regardless of who's already off the board. So I would lean Mims.
I agree. I think Mims. I think what's important to do here in these situations, look at the sequencing. Like if you don't take a tackle right now, you're out of luck when it comes to starting tackles. Like by the time the second round rolls around, corners you can still get. I am going to have Arnold a little bit higher in my board than Mims, but it does remind me of last year where the Steelers they traded up a few spots to take Broderick Jones. You could have taken Christian Gonzalez, who I had higher in my board, but the sequencing wouldn't have worked out nice. Then you were able to get Broderick and Porter. So I like the sequencing if we take Mims at this pick, Shayne.
Yeah, I agree with that too. So we'll take Mims here. Okay, so we will be up here again at 51. See what we have. Okay, so Frazier goes right before us to the Eagles. So that's
one pick before.
One pick before. So this is what we have on the board right now. So we got, as far as what the Steelers would be interested in, receivers are still interesting for option here. We got like a guy like Ricky Pearsall, Jermaine Burton, who I'm not as high on, Keon Coleman, guys like that. Let's look at specifically. Okay. So is there a position you guys want to focus on here? Because I can look at specific positions. Like I can see what receivers are left here and look there.
Yeah, let's look at receiver. I think we need to look at receiver, look at corner, and then maybe interior defensive line because those top three centers are gone. I don't think there's a center worth drafting at this spot.
No. So this is what we got at receiver. Pearsall would definitely be my favorite in this group, for sure, and he is at the top of this board here. So that's what we have at receiver. If we go to corner, we have Kyrie Jackson is probably the guy that they have highest here, obviously. I like some of these players in this range, so I wouldn't want to take them here, but if we can get one of these guys later, possibly, for corner at least. I don't think corner's probably where. And then defensive interior, like you said. Fisk is here. Guys like Chris Jenkins are here. I like Rick Roro too. I'm not as high on Fisk as most people are. I will say that. So from a personal standpoint, but I would understand at 51, like the athleticism and the profile there. I get that. But any way you guys are leaning in particular?
I feel like you can get a wide receiver too here in the second round. It just seems too perfect. And I like a lot of the names there. So I'm going to be more happy with whichever receiver we end up on. If you want Pearsall, I like Jalen Polk quite a bit, maybe a little bit more than most people do, but I'm even fine with Keon Coleman here. I don't think he's a great fit next to Pickens. Like it's a similar thing, but I just like a lot of these players more than I like the corners, more than I like the defensive linemen.
Yeah, I agree too. I do think there's a level of intrigue to get a guy like Ruka Horahora right there because you just don't find those type of defensive linemen very often. A Tracy type of guy that you can plug and play with Keanu Benton, hopefully for the foreseeable future. But I think I'm leaning with you guys. I like the wide receiver at this spot. I think it's a huge need for the Steelers. You can't afford to have your offense be bad again. Like you need to score more than like 16.5 offensive points per game. I would lean Pearsall over Polk personally. He would be probably the highest remaining wide receiver left on the board for me. I'm actually a fan of Xavier Legette as well. I know but
I like Legette a lot.
Me too. I think he went actually.
Did he go already?
He did, but I think it was 33 to the Panthers. So
then you know what? I think that Pearsall would be a wise decision because I'm afraid if you wait one more round here, you're looking at that wide receiver 3 type, and they really need a wide receiver 2 to go with Pickens. So I would go Pearsall here. Do you guys have a different preference?
I go Pearsall too. I think that he's the safest pick left at receiver 2. Like I'm really confident he's going to be a really good NFL player. Will he ever be more than like a mid-tier wide receiver 2? Maybe not, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be one. So it's kind of that. You take the guy that you're confident can be a contributor right away for you.
I'm happy with Pearsall. I'd personally go Polk, but I'm totally attentive to Pearsall and going to be, celebrating on draft day if that's what
Fair enough. All right, we'll go.
See, this is why this works out so nice. The 3 of us here, we can have a tiebreaker. You're not going to end in a tie.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the 3rd round here.
And Corley just goes. He probably would have been the guy that they'd be interested in, but he just went to the Rams here. So looking at who we have here, so I want to look at the corner spot again. They have him ranked a little bit lower than 84, but I'm a huge fan of Renardo Green personally. I don't know where you guys are at with him. I think he's a great plug and play man press guy that you could play opposite of Porter. A little bit of redundancy in terms of the focus on press man, but I think that that's kind of the type that they go for anyway. So he had Malik Neighbors in jail a lot of the game they played at LSU. It was not great when those two went up against each other for Neighbors specifically. that definitely stands out to me specifically as a game for him. But that's just for corner, and then we have probably defensive interior we could look at too. I did want to see like for center if Van Pran is here in the third round, if you guys like him enough to take him here. So that's something to consider too. And then we'll throw, I think, defensive interior probably in two. So Dorless is a guy that I'm very split on. I don't know what to do with him personally. He might be kind of a fit for the Steelers, but also, like, is he going to be an edge? Is he going to be an inside guy? I don't really know with him.
I like Dorless as a player, and then I have the fear of him just being DeMarvin Leal again.
Right, that's my really kind of the same thing. Yeah, it's like,
and I like him, but I don't think you can plug him in on the interior every down, and there's just no room on the edge.
Right.
So it goes to, okay, let's kind of look somewhere else. But I do like Dorless a lot.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing with him too.
Dorless, Green. It's interesting because I think that those guys are probably the overall a little bit better value than Van Pran. Van Pran, I think, fills a position of need. You can potentially plug him in right there. If you guys are joining us live here, drop in the chat like what we do right now. If we don't hear from you in the next few seconds here, we'll make a selection. I can get behind the center pick here because if you don't take one now, you're probably looking at maybe another slight tier gap drop from Van Pran to the next guy down, whether that's Bo Limmer, whoever you guys think that is right there. Shayne, what do you think? I'll let you make that call.
Yeah, I'll give it to you on this one. You have more.
It's tough because, like, I think Van Pran's fine. Like, I don't think he's like, I think he can be a starting center, but I don't think he's going to be anything more than an average one. And granted, we don't have a one right now. So you could say, well, who cares because you don't have one to begin with. But I would rather them kind of either take a shot on a later round guy. There might even be one in this draft that we can grab, or just sign a straight free agent that has starting experience. Just some guys still out there, rather than not take the better player in the draft. And for me, Green would be the better player, and I think a better fit for the Steelers too.
That exact point goes to, like, my issue with the Steelers is they leave themselves in a win now type situation, and they're not a win now team. So I would probably lean corner and go with Green, but I'm fine with any of them.
Ivan chimes in and says center. I get the argument because the
I do too.
I get bad last year, and the defense was really not. I mean, statistically, the defense in terms of DVOA and EPA was a fine defense. but I'm always for going BPA. But I do understand that sequencing is important in these type of things. So Shayne, go ahead and make our pick.
Yeah, I hate to break it to Ivan. I can't get behind leaving. Like, again, this is my own personal evaluation. Like, I would take Green at the end of the second round. So that's part of that for me. Maybe other people don't like him as much, and that's fine. But I feel like you'd have to go Green.
We'll get you your center, Ivan. It's coming up.
We'll get one.
When you stand on the table for somebody like that, we got to go with them. I like the conviction.
So that's fair.
I do too. Now I'm gonna have to go plug more of his tape in now too, because I've watched a little bit of Green, but not a ton.
That was on my to-do list right after you said that.
Yeah, he is a fun one. He's certainly, I think you'll like him a lot. I think, Tommy. So now we're back up at 98 here. So I want to bring back up interior line, and I want to bring back up defensive interior again, probably too. And actually, this is the point where I would throw in even receiver again, possibly. Okay. So if we're looking at these positions here, Limmer is a guy that I haven't watched a ton of. I know he has his fans. I know that some people do think that his Senior Bowl performance was very good from what I remember. Like, he's that type of, like, kind of grinder at center, in my opinion. Like, the one that can maybe not be a great player, but is at least going to get everything out of him that you can. Like, I don't think he's going to leave anything on the bone. I like Dwayne Carter, but more probably another round later. A defensive interior guy. Like, I think he's very, like, solid, but not spectacular at anything. If you want to go for just straight up upside, Leonard Taylor's there, but he hasn't done much of anything. At Miami, unfortunately, he's kind of a downturn for him. Man, like this at this point, I don't think the value's great at these positions, unfortunately.
McKinley Jackson is interesting as a run defending type.
Yeah, but
I am a big fan of Cooper Beebe. I know the Steelers haven't shown any interest in him, and he's played every position but center in college.
Right. So it's like
I like Mango. Wingo's the name that jumped out at me when you scrolled down a little bit. I know people don't love Wingo, but I just how quick he is off the ball. He's somebody that I like.
My thing with Wingo is, and I agree with you, Josh, I like him a lot. He's either going to be a like gap penetrator that gets you like between 5 and 8 sacks a year and gets like 30, 40 pressures as a part-time player, or he can't play in the NFL.
Yeah.
It's literally going to be one of the two. And I just don't know which one it is at this point. And it makes it really hard for me because I want to rank him higher than I did even when I did my rankings for defensive interior. But man, he's hard to kind of peg down because
the third feels too early for him.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Same with Mason Smith has such an interesting body type. I just wish his film was better. Like he hasn't played a ton, but here's my thought, Shayne. My father-in-law would be furious if we didn't go Bo Limmer here. He's a big Bo Limmer fan. The Steelers have that huge need at center. I do worry about his anchoring strength. Like I think he needs to put on like 10 pounds. But the guy can really move. I think he would fit a zone scheme well. So what do you guys think?
I mean, he would fit, and it would get you a player that I do think is capable of starting. Again, I don't know how good of a starter he will be, but I think he will give you everything that he has available to him.
If you can walk away with a tackle, receiver, corner, and center and feel pretty good about all of them, that's a good start to the draft.
It's pretty hard to argue that. The only guy I'm seeing here, actually, now that I have the full board up, that I kind of would have to bang the table for a little bit is just because we don't have like a long-term solution next to Minka. Dadrian Taylor-Demerson is a really good player out of Texas Tech. I don't think he's like, it's not nearly as much of a need, but I'm just throwing that out there. But I do think Limmer probably is the safe pick here.
I'm good with Limmer.
Right. Okay, we'll get your center then. We'll get the center there then. So now we wait a little while here. Keep back up at 119. I see a player already that I think would be a great fit, mostly because I think he's a slot defender. Tyke Smith out of Georgia. I think he's one of the better slot-specific players in this class. Like he's listed as safety, but he's really a slot player. Played most of his snaps in the slot this past year at Georgia. He would be definitely an upgrade because we don't have one, I don't think, personally.
Man.
Like he's one.
I am a big Cam Hart fan. I know he does not fit the slot at all, but I do like Cam Hart.
Yeah, a lot of people actually like him. I know too. Yeah, he's that bigger, more like powerful corner.
I like Tyke Smith a good bit.
That's my thing.
I like him a good bit. I think because you can just plug him there and you know he's gonna be able to hang in the slot and as a tackler and
it's the biggest remaining need as well. And I think he's one of the best players.
I think if we hadn't addressed outside corner already, Tommy, I would definitely listen to him over Hart over that. just because like that's more important technically, but we just don't have a guy there right now, and I think Smith would be able to come in and kind of take care of that pretty quickly. I will mention as well. Now, I don't think we should do it specifically because of who we're drafting for with the Steelers, because I don't know if they would use him in any meaningful way. But Malik Washington would be really good value for me personally at 119. Talk about a freaking productive player. I mean, just unbelievable production at Virginia of all places.
And really not in a great offense.
Not in a great offense, but like I already know like he's the guy that I'm looking at that's like he's going to get drafted on day 3, and everyone's going to be like, who is this guy? Like 6 weeks in the year when he has 70 targets, and you're like, what's going on? Like, because some team is going to be like, yeah, we can just throw him the ball like 8 times a game and get production out of him. So, but no, I think for the Steelers, probably for me, it's Smith.
I like Washington a lot. I just think it muddies the waters because it's like, what do you do now? Do you have like 3 slot receivers on your team? Where do you play?
That's kind of the issue with the Steelers, right? Like I wouldn't take him for us because of the fit, but he's probably the best player on the board for me personally. But that's just what I'm telling you there.
I'm good with Tyke Smith here. I think he gives you a little bit of what you need in that secondary, fills that role,
especially the slot snaps that he could take up for sure. So good Tyke Smith here. Next pickup here with the wait a good while, I know. So I think we're up at like 170.
We can definitely go best player available because we have
we've
addressed the needs. We've addressed the needs.
So we're looking at just the board here
QB3.
in general. QB3. Yeah, QB3.
Jefferson, you get your run defender there.
Yeah.
Did we take it? Did we take interior defender yet?
We did not, I don't think.
I believe that's the only thing we're missing.
Right. So if we want
in terms of the needs,
somebody, right? In terms of needs. I'm looking here. So I will say, had we not taken Bo Limmer, Hunter Norzad is.
I like Hunter Norzad too.
Yeah,
I was actually going to say like we could maybe wait around for Hunter Norzad because I like him quite a bit.
That was my thing, but
the gap is probably not all that huge between the two.
No,
but Norzad, like I guess if you really wanted to make sure that you have that competition and guys in that room, I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea of it, but
but
he's played other positions on the line as well. He wasn't as good as a guard, but there's some versatility there. I wouldn't hate it.
Also, tackle for Cornell before going to Penn State. Very funny career.
Interesting.
But no,
he's been in college since like 2018 or something.
Yeah,
it's a very long time.
He's definitely an older player. But just looking at the board here, like you said, guys, like probably Jordan Jefferson would make sense. Like he says, run defender. I'm just kind of that third LSU defensive interior guy. Don't need any tight end help, especially at this point, so we don't have to worry about that.
Man, we don't need it at all, but Cody Schrader jumps out just so
he's a grinder for sure. He was just like Tomlin
so much.
Yeah, he was fun to watch. I'm looking to see if there's anybody that stands out to me that I'm like, can't believe this guy's here. I like Caden Wallace too. Like I've been doing a lot of Penn State guys because of the Penn State stuff. Tommy's
man, Bortolini too.
Yeah,
that's another guy. I don't think he's that dissimilar from Limmer. I think Limmer's more the run blocker. He's more the pass protector.
Right, Bortolini. Great athlete. Great athlete. Hey, we might be able to snag another center in our next pick too. So I wouldn't even worry about that too much if we want to do that.
There we go. I think that in the IDL is kind of important here. Just getting a guy. I mean, the Steelers were pushed off the ball last year with Montravius Adams. You couldn't play Adams and Ogunjobi at the same time because they're just not good run defenders. So
no way. So
I would be good with Jordan Jefferson if you guys are.
I like it too. Yeah, we can do Jefferson here. And then our last pick here at 195 feels. I don't think that's going to happen. By the way, I have this feeling like our last pick is not going to be 195. There's going to be some amount of like maneuvering around. I don't know if Con wants to have no dart throws in the 7th, but. With that being the case, I think at this point, looking at it, and Norzad's still here, so you could do that. I would have Bortolini still there, so like all those guys. We already addressed slot, but Daquan Hardy is still there, so like it definitely some good players still here on the board. For me,
Driscoll's interesting up there as well too.
As well.
The huge offensive tackle, but that need's been addressed already. I'm not sure what his chances of making the team would be.
Right. I feel like at this point, maybe let me see who's on the board at linebacker. We haven't thrown a dart at not trade. Thrown a dart at linebacker yet. So we got still Chambers, kind of whatever.
The most Steelers name ever, right there.
Yeah, that is true. Hopper had a horrendous.
Trevin Wallace. There's no way that Trevin Wallace is going to be here at this point. I don't think so. Good of an athlete. So
I hate to keep doing the Penn State thing, but I like Curtis Jacobs as a developmental coverage linebacker and maybe play special teams for you in the meantime. Like that would make some sense.
I like Jacobs too. I kind of like the Penn State corners a little bit better. Dixon and Hardy getting that slot versatility. Dixon mostly played outside, but he was a pass rusher too. Like he kind of has that club. He was
a pass rusher for them.
So that intrigues me that maybe they turn him into a Mike Hilton-esque rusher.
Right.
But I'm not willing to stand on the table for Johnny Dixon or pound the table.
Right. So. I think I'd probably lean linebacker just because we haven't taken a swing on it. Like that's kind of what I would do at this point.
I think a linebacker stands a good shot at making the team. Like the depth is not fantastic.
That's another thing too.
So, and I think at worst, like you're looking at competition with Mark Robinson. So,
long snapper, Colin Holba,
all right, yeah,
6th round.
There you go.
Yeah, but like I said, for me, it'd probably be like if we could take Wallace because he's here, but I don't think he'll be here either. Like
I don't think he will be. If you want to, let's go Jacobs then. The more realistic of that.
Yeah, we can do Jacobs. Yeah, I could see him being here still for sure.
Yeah,
and then that should do it. So let's see what they have to say about the draft here. Probably gonna say that we're terrible just because but no, we'll see what we kind of got here. So just to recap, guys. We had once it's done here, it should be any second. There we go.
Did well early.
We did well early. Yeah. The late round picks, who cares? You're taking Darthos. I think Smith should definitely be like, I understand that he's not ranked as high as we took him, but I think he'd be a great fit. Yeah, we did. They think we did real good on day 1 and 2, which is what you really want to be able to do. So
yeah, and then for those listening here, we got the Marius Mims in round 1, Ricky Pearsall in round 2, Renardo Green, the Florida State cornerback, in round 3, as well as Bo Limmer with the second third-round pick that came from the Eagles in the deal, the compensatory pick, the Arkansas center. And then in round 4, Tyke Smith, safety defensive back out of Georgia. Jordan Jefferson in round 6, the LSU defensive tackle. And then linebacker Curtis Jacobs from Penn State with the other round 6, 195 overall. So let us know what you guys think of this draft haul. That was a fun exercise. I'm glad we got to do that. Shayne, I'd like to do this maybe in the weeks leading up to that. And guys, feel free to interject. You can leave your comments down below on YouTube. And if you missed a lot of that, so listening to the audio version, we encourage you to check us out on YouTube, on Still Curtain YouTube channel. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you all for following us on the show today. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow Josh on Twitter at Yourish3. You can check out the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.